Welcome to Natural Resources University. This week's episode features Fire University, hosted by Marcus Lashley.
Welcome to Fire University. This is a podcast dedicated to fire ecology and management within the Natural Resource University podcast network. My name is Dr. Marcus Lashley. I'm a wildlife biologist, an assistant professor of disturbance ecology at the University of Florida, and a lifelong hunter that's passionate about wildlife conservation and management. In this podcast, I will interview scientists and professionals not only on the latest research in fire ecology, but also about their experiences in hopes that you as the listeners can learn why fire ecology is important and also how you can use it to meet your natural resource management goals. So let's get to the burning questions in Fire University. Hey everybody, welcome back to Fire University. Today we're going to change topics a little bit. I have Laurel Kays here with me, so I'm glad that you were able to come. I really appreciate you joining us.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, I thought it would be a fun conversation. I guess the first time that I remember us meeting was when we were working on some wildland fire training for an online course. And that turned out to be pretty cool and has been pretty popular. Folks have, found the links on our different things and we've shared it in all sorts of places. And a lot of people have taken that, which is pretty cool. So it's kind of interesting to see people getting use of some of the work that we've embarked on. But it kind of got me interested in talking to you about some of the other outreach programs that you've been involved with and just wanted to pick your brain about different things. So I guess we could start. Do you want to tell everybody a little bit about yourself, like, what your job is, those sorts of things?
Sure. Yeah. So I am currently the Fire Learning Network Manager for the Nature Conservancy. I work in our North America Fire Unit. So the Fire Learning Network is a nationwide program, and we have specific sites across the country, everywhere from Arkansas to the southern Blue Ridge, all the way out to California, Montana, Great Plains, all over the place. And we work with people in those specific sites. We give them a small amount of funding, we connect them to each other, and we help them try and come up with some creative solutions to solve the problems that all of us are facing related to fire. And then try and share those solutions out when something comes up that really seems to work. The TREX program, for example, a lot of people know about, started within the Fire Learning Network. But I'm based here in North Carolina, proudly so. I'm also the president of our State Prescribed Fire Council. And like you alluded to in my previous position, I worked Southeast-wide out of NC State University. So still very connected and proud to be here in the Southeast, for sure.
Yeah. Well, really interesting and really cool job. How did you get into fire? Like what?
Through a very winding road.
I assume that you had an interesting story.
I feel like most of us do, which is fun. I feel like a lot of fire people have kind of a winding road to get here. So my dad was actually an extension forester for my entire life. He just retired this year. So he and my mom met in forestry school. So to a certain degree was like going to end up somewhere in natural resources. I'm not sure quite how to hope not to.
Yeah.
But I went to school for political science and I worked in DC for about a year and was like, absolutely not, get me out of here. And no offense to anyone living in DC, not for me. And so I moved out to Wyoming and just worked for a tourist business and, messed around for a little while, and then ended up working seasonally for the National Park Service, and decided, okay, fine, I'll get in the family business. Went back to school for my master's, and that's where I ended up working with Jen Fawcett, doing some work for her while I was in grad school. Got a job worked out, and that was firework, obviously, and I just kept doing the fire stuff and got a mitigation outreach focused job in the mountains after grad school, and then ended up going back to NC State to work with Jen on those same grant projects. So I just kind of happened into it, and once I started doing it, I think like a lot of us, I was like, this is great, I don't want to leave. And so far I haven't.
Well, that's interesting. So I have an extension role at UF, and that's kind of been one of my. I have two young girls at home, and it's like a dream that they, I'm not forcing it, but I would love for them to be really passionate about conservation and move into some sort of related field. But we'll see.
It's been fun. I've seen my dad at a couple conferences and
Yeah,
stuff like that. It's a fun little thing.
yeah, yeah. That's interesting. Well, so you're involved in so many things. It's hard for me to really pinpoint. One thing that you said earlier, you said something along the lines of we share a lot of problems. And I know when we were talking before we went on the air, you were talking about how similar problems were across the landscape. So I was just curious what your thoughts were on maybe some of the problems or barriers that you see that we're trying to overcome.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I was in Wyoming for a meeting with the group that we work with out there that works sort of across the area around Yellowstone, essentially. And they're a newer collaborative that's trying to expand. So they're talking about talking about public acceptance, trying to get the public to understand what we're doing, why, and talking about housing. And, okay, we've got all of this money through infrastructure bill and all, the powers that be are finally understanding we need resources to do this, but we don't have anywhere to house the people that we're trying to hire, or there's not enough people out there to hire to do the work that we need to do. Those are some big ones that just I hear everywhere, like from California to here, Florida and the Southeast, just everywhere. Those are things that we're all dealing with, which is comforting in some ways. And I hope that eventually someone will find a, magic solution somewhere that the rest of us can all adopt. Um, but yeah, it is just really interesting that you go these very, very different places with very, different cultural stuff and very different types of people and different topography and landscapes and all of that. But a lot of the problems, not all of them, but a lot of them sound really, really similar.
Mm-hmm. So when you're saying the work that we need to do, is that primarily prescribed fire, or does it include other fire related issues? Does that differ based on where you're at?
That definitely does differ. I think here in the Southeast, we're generally talking prescribed fire. And even when we're talking things like, mitigation around communities and stuff, a lot of times prescribed fire is a big part of that conversation too.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, to continue the Wyoming example, they certainly do some burning, and I know they're trying to do more for sure, but a lot of what they're talking about is things like, thinning around communities, trying to get folks to cut down a couple high-risk trees near their houses, managed wildfire, stuff like that. Stuff that we still talk about here, but is less central. And I think, again, here is often still connected to ultimately getting prescribed fire, whereas I think a lot of other places that they haven't quite gotten there yet, or that's just not appropriate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. So I guess in the South, it's persisted culturally for a lot longer, but we probably also have some legislation in several states that promotes the use of prescribed fire even over out west, and I guess with good reason in many cases. But yeah, it's always interesting to me to think about the differences in perception of fire and where
Yeah,
those stem from.
yeah. I think the cultural persistence piece is huge. I'm not a policy expert. I think you're right about some of the legislative protections and stuff, but yeah, I think the really big thing is that it just has been a part of life here for a lot longer. And I'm again not a historian, but I think there's also something to be said about the fact that it was adopted here in the South by white settlers. And so it became seen as something that, white people did too, which gives it a very different frame from places like California, where largely the folks who were burning were pretty exclusively native. And that was framed in a very different way. And, frankly, some of those people were jailed, shot, in a way that was societally permissible, in a way that it would not have been to do here to the white landowners who were burning, who were still, put down very heavily, right? And we all know about the Dixie Crusaders and all of that. I'm not saying that folks here in the South didn't face real hardship, but I think there's some differences. And again, with all that said, not a historian. So if anyone is a historian who just wants to disagree with me, that is fine.
Yeah. Well, we actually are working on lining up a few people to dive more into some of those issues. But yeah, it's just interesting. I mean, the other obvious problem or big difference, I guess, is the scale of wildfire and how fuel accumulates in systems. And we have a dry system out west that accumulates fuel really to levels that are unsafe more quickly, and it's just harder to implement prescribed fire in that situation.
Yeah, and when you're talking about outreach too, a lot of the people that you might be trying to talk to and say, hey, we need to do this burn, you might see some smoke, you might want to stay inside, those sort of things. Those might already be people who have been smoked out for months. They might have been people who have lost a house and have some real emotional baggage around smoke. And that can be true here, for sure. We have a big wildfire season in 2016 in the mountains, and we definitely have fires, but I think it's definitely a different scale out there that we're very fortunate to not necessarily have here.
Yeah. Well, earlier, I know I'm kind of bouncing around, but you just got my mind racing about several things. Earlier, you said that you were in the North American unit or something. That I took that to mean that your organization is doing similar things in other places.
Yeah, I am not, and I guess this is a sort of fun little peek into the TNC hierarchy, but we're the North America Fire Unit, but within, to my understanding, TNC, the US branch of TNC. So we're the nationwide fire unit, essentially.
Yeah.
And we're not in charge of the other units. The states are autonomous. Their fire programs rule themselves. We are just sort of a national level support.
Yeah. Well, I was just curious. I don't know how much experience you have with some this type of programming in other places, even if it's in North America, just a different country. But I was just curious, do you see the same sort of issues when you get outside of the States?
I really don't have much experience in that. I think it's likely. I know a little bit just from reading and listening to other people about Canada, and they have, again, to my understanding, if anyone's Canadian and wants to write in and disagree, that's cool.
We have 2 or 3 listeners from Canada based on downloads.
But to my understanding, they have a somewhat similar history of widespread native use of fire, colonization, fire suppression, and now large wildfire problems, especially in certain parts of Canada. I know a lot less about Mexico and Central America, but I know there's definitely fire work going on there. I know Ray Crandall at Florida, I think she does a lot of work in Belize. There, McCree Anderson, who works at TNC in Arkansas, has a really cool international exchange program. And I forget where his folks tend to come from. I think a couple different countries, including, I think, is it Zambia? There's some African country that I can't remember. But he has, every year these folks come in and they do fire and they drive around and burn and show them, the work that they do. So there's definitely fire work going on, all over the world. But but I don't really know enough to say if what their problems look like, if they look similar, or they have, really different stuff going on.
Yeah. I know from the research aspect, being involved in a few journals and doing fire research, I get papers to handle from the global south, so to speak, on fire pretty commonly. I don't really get them from outside of North America in the northern hemisphere very often, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, I know there's like Portugal and Spain do have some pretty substantial prescribed fire work going on. There's been at least one TREX prescribed fire training exchange over there.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely happening all over. And there's a South African TREX a South African W TREX, I think, women's TREX, that just opened applications. So it's definitely happening everywhere, which is super cool.
Yeah, for sure. Well, kind of redirecting back to your expertise and what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. Are there any? I guess I just wanted to kind of get a view and have the audience hear kind of what some of the outreach programs that you work on, like, what do they look like? Like what's the purpose? What are you doing?
Yeah, so my job is sort of interesting now because, as part of our prescribed fire council, I definitely still participate in some, like, putting on prescribed fire demonstrations so people can come and watch and see how that works, or doing, some of the fire festivals that are really fun, just, talking to kids at their level about how fire is cool and it's good sometimes. But on a day-to-day in my job, I'm much more supporting other people who are doing those things and offering them assistance as I can and connecting them to people who have done those sort of things. But I think it is becoming, those sort of fire demonstrations are ones that I really like. And I think are sort of becoming, especially in places where prescribed fire is more a piece of the puzzle, are becoming more popular. Or folks in the Central Appalachians just did one right up at a state park. I grew up in Western Maryland, a state park that people I knew used to go to all the time. And I actually saw someone from my hometown who I knew post about it on Facebook, share the information that I shared on Facebook. It's like, oh, I know those people. So I think, that is a really cool one. If you can get people out to actually see a prescribed fire, it's always really fun because everyone's super interested for about 5 minutes once you lit that first line. And then they're like, okay, these are just people walking around.
Yeah.
And they start to sort of filter out, which I think is good because it really does, like, get the message across that it's fire and it's cool and it's awesome. But also at the end of the day, we're just people doing jobs, and sometimes it's kind of boring, and that is a good message, I think, for people to ultimately get.
Yeah,
boring to watch, at least. Not to do.
You really don't want a high level of excitement during the prescribed. Yeah, I can understand that. You want there to be enough excitement that we're encouraging people to pick it up, but also it to be boring enough to realize, oh, we can apply prescribed fire safely and achieve some really nice objectives in many cases by doing that in this boring fashion.
Exactly. Yeah, I know it's always harder to get people, both from a logistics liability standpoint and just getting people to be able to take the time to go out. But things like Learn and Burns, things like those demonstrations, the stuff that actually gets people out and doing or seeing something, really, I think is the best way to get that message across. But again, everyone's strapped for time and resources, and that's not always possible. But I think
certainly an important piece of the puzzle. But it is, like you said, it's really taxing on resources, and time being one of those really important ones. But you just can't you can't have 10,000 people there either. It
Right.
has to be a relatively small and localized event. That was one thing when we started working on some of the fire training together that piqued my interest about the prescribed burn associations, is that, that's a potential opportunity to have landowners teaching each other, and if you have lots of those spread out in different communities, you can potentially get a lot of people a lot of experience that you wouldn't be able to through these other programs.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the tough thing about outreach is that, I just listened to a talk that Sarah McCaffrey's the researcher with Rocky Mountain Research Station. She's either retiring very soon or already has, but, that she gave at the Cohesive Strategy Workshop and, talking about some of the social science behind fire. And a lot of times I listen to those talks and I'm like, we all, building trust is really important. Talking to people, those things are really important. And a lot of the tough thing about outreach is a lot of us know that, and we just don't have the time and manpower, and a lot of us are working on grants that ask us how many people we talk to or how many people you had at the workshop, and so, I think things like prescribed burn associations that can sort of be a pipeline, for those of us in sort of the more, I don't know, typical outreach positions, can get a big group of people together and say, here's this information about fire, and these people can help you, and have a place to send them instead of just, giving them some brochures and saying you can call the Forest Service, who is already, your state Forest Service, who is already, overtaxed and overworked, right? And some of those PBAs, like particularly the one here in the Sandhills in North Carolina, they have a coordinator, Jesse Wimberly, who I'm sure a lot of people know. And his, position is really cool and really important because not only does he help, coordinate who's burning where and to some of that stuff, but he also helps those landowners sort of understand and navigate that whole picture of things like equip and what good management looks like, and sort of holding their hand as they figure that out. Which is so important because a lot of landowners really do want to do something good with their land, but that process of what that looks like and what help is out there is super confusing. And having someone who can take you down that journey and who you can call and say, hey, what is going on with this equip application is really, really helpful.
Yeah. No, that's really, really interesting. I'm thinking about my interaction. That's the other thing that's really interesting is depending on what your position is and who you work for. And I know that you have a good grasp on that since you've been in a few different organizations in different capacities. But I think about, I'm kind of challenged with this, expectation to develop new knowledge. So from a research standpoint, and then I also have an extension appointment. So I'm trying to get that out to as many people as I can through all kinds of ways, including what we're doing right now. But then I get a lot of questions, that feedback from that, and people, I would say it's pretty common that I get feedback like, hey, I'd really love to do this, but like, I don't even know where to start. And it's like, well, you've started in a good place. Like you're getting information, which is why they reached out to me. But, having some sort of support logistically, and just from a knowledge standpoint, experience standpoint, that's something that I just can't provide that. Not to that many people anyway. And, it's nice to have, I guess, these different kinds of things like the PBA is a really, really interesting one. And I hope that takes off. But, we have other organizations and people and funding, and you're involved in some of that stuff where we're trying to, create that sort of structure and community and support to help people get out and, accomplish this, which I understand is a daunting task up front. If you've never used fire, like that's scary.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely is. But yeah, and I think we are, making some progress towards having this sort of whole ecosystem of people where, if you get in contact with one little piece of that web, that person can pass you on to someone who can get you what you need.
Yeah.
And we need more people, more capacity, like everybody else on the planet. But I think we are making some headway there and being able to have that for people who get in contact with someone somehow.
Yeah. I always hate to have the feeling that I'm passing people off, but at the same time, it's like, okay, well, we have different roles. And yeah, it's just I agree. I think that we are building that capacity, but
And I
I've
think,
also go ahead.
and I think, it feels weird to say like passing people off, like we're, passing a basket around or something, but
Well, I
but
didn't mean
also
it that way.
no. But I mean, it does, like, it's a weird thing to say, but also, like, I think that's like a really important role for extension specifically, that has such a, it's an over 100-year institution, which in this country is pretty long. It's really well known, particularly in rural areas, by people who have lived there for a while. There's some trust there, and it is often the first place people end up if they have a question about anything even vaguely related to the outdoors. And so I think it is really great that a lot more extension folks are getting involved in fire, even if just having some basic knowledge of who else is doing this. Because a lot of times y'all are the people who get that first email, and having, knowing, even if you know nothing else about fire, knowing, hey, this person should talk to the Longleaf Alliance, or this person should talk to their state forester. A lot of times that's really all people are looking for, is just, don't make me cold call more people. Who do I actually need to talk to?
Right. Well, I think yeah. When I say passing off, I'm kind of from the user standpoint.
Right.
It probably feels that way. And really, what I'm kind of thinking about it in a different way, which maybe is more in line with the way that you are, that I'm really kind of serving as a connector instead. Like, connect you to the resource that you're looking for.
Yeah. And I think, at least in my experience, which isn't definitive, but most people are really grateful for that. Most people are really grateful for the, I don't know, but I can find that for you response, which is kind of the extension classic, I think.
Yeah. I definitely do that plenty. It's yeah, I mean, the questions are so broad. Often it's like, well, like, I'm not an expert on everything. Like, I have no idea.
Right.
I need to talk to somebody else that has a better handle on this. So it was one thing I was going to say a minute ago, but I didn't want to cut you off. It's also interesting. I've talked to quite a few private consultants that help people, consulting wise, with implementing prescribed fire in the South, and pretty much got the same message from all of them. Like, we're not taking new people. We've already got more than we can handle, which is great on one side, that there are that many people trying to use prescribed fire and utilize that practice and to manage natural resources, which I think both advocate pretty strongly as necessary, at least in the South. And on the other hand, it's like, wow, there seems to be a lot of opportunity there, where there are more people that want to implement this, and that's another area that we could build capacity.
Yeah.
It's not just in a state or federal agency or an NGO. There's probably also some opportunity on the private side.
Yeah. I mean, opportunity and necessity too. I think particularly things like, loggers. Those are businesses that we're seeing on a national scale, at least, like, fading fast. And those are people that we need, but it's expensive. It's, pretty high risk. It's one of logging specifically is one of the most dangerous professions in the country.
Mm-hmm.
And, we need more people in those logging, those contracting positions. And I think we probably haven't been talking enough about what it would look like to make that a feasible career for more people.
Yeah. Well, it seems like, it always comes down to risk. That risk to benefit ratio. It seems like with something like fire, taking on that risk is not always the best ratio, I guess.
Right.
But it does seem like a big opportunity, and I get asked that quite a bit. It's like, how do we get more incentive from that? I also get the same thing from, you're talking about the logging or the timber industry, and we have a lot of land that's owned by, the timber industry. A lot of people lease those. So then, those people are interested in wildlife, and they see the stuff that I want, that I put out, and they want to reach out to me. And, I commonly get that question, well, how do we encourage, the landowner that we're leasing from to allow us to use fire? And it always comes down to that risk benefit ratio from the owner's standpoint.
Yeah. And I think that is an opportunity for, maybe that's more education than outreach, but when you're talking about stuff like that, stuff like insurance, which is a huge issue, I think that's another like nationwide thing you hear everywhere. And again, if I'm not a historian, I'm like not an insurance expert 20 times more.
Yeah. Well, there was a reason why we had somebody else do the policy part of the,
right.
the training.
Yeah. But the very, the little kernel that I do understand is that some part of that is that the insurance industry really does not understand prescribed fire, what it is, how it's different from wildfire. And I think there's probably some opportunity there. And I know there's folks, working on that to try and get some of those sort of more niche powers that be to understand what we're doing and see if that can move the needle a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Well, I wonder how much of it also, like, it seems like that you may fit into the same kind of mindset, but I kind of want to stay away from policy. Like I got into this to not be dealing with policy, and it seems like maybe you've been a little more involved in it than I have, especially when you lived in DC, but it didn't seem like that was the way that you wanted to go either. I wonder how much of it is just that the type of people that get into fire science and, natural resource management, a lot of those people are just not interested in, advocating, I guess, on the policy front.
Yeah, I have a love-hate relationship with all of that. Like, I definitely was not cut out to like work on the Hill or anything like that. Like, God bless you if that's your gig, but it's not mine.
Well, we need people to do all of it, right? Right.
But I do find myself like drawn a bit to the policy stuff, especially working nationwide now, because so many of these problems are everywhere. And not that policy is like a magic thing that's going to overnight change everything. But when you're hearing people having the same conversations about these same barriers everywhere, I think there is a role. There needs to be a role for policy, and there need to be folks who, and I'm not necessarily talking about myself here, but people who are on the ground working, who have a voice in that policy and who can actually say, like, this is actually what we're seeing and this is what we need. So y'all go figure out how to do it.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of it maybe some of the issue is connectivity. The people that are out in the field doing, that aspect, that are seeing what the problems are, experiencing the barriers, are not necessarily directly connected to the policy or the policymakers, for that matter. Now, there are obviously exceptions.
And I think there is. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it just doesn't matter how you look at that web. There's a web of nodes in there that, the connectivity is critical between all of those.
Yeah, and I think there is increasingly an understanding in the prescribed fire world that like this is that we need to have a policy voice. And I think there's sort of people
Hmm.
coalescing around that. And one of the cool things I think about fire, this isn't true everywhere. I think it's probably more true in the Southeast, but I think in general, fire, even people who aren't primarily field based, like have some field experience or
Hmm.
still go out and burn sometimes, which I think is maybe a little unusual in a lot of fields to have people who are, primarily in the office still have some connection to going out. It's not
Hmm.
obviously the same as being out there every day, but it is a cool thing that, there's kind of an unspoken expectation. I'll just say in the South, at least that I've experienced, that if you're doing some sort of firework, like you should go burn sometimes at least.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right. That's probably one advantage that we have in this case is a lot of people that are in policy or in these more administrative roles or whatever. A lot of them started in positions where they were out burning all the time, and there's a lot of value in that. I did that. Getting a job where I had to burn all the time kind of led me into going to NC State specifically to study fire and how it affected wildlife. So it kind of led me into this path, and there's a lot of value in that,
Yeah.
having people that have a lot of experience. Really, for me now, it's more about having a little fun, like getting
Right.
out in the field and doing that, and I get to do that some, not nearly as much as I want to. My capacity is usually getting students on fires that to get some experience. That's usually what I'm doing, but sometimes with private landowners as well. But yeah, if nothing else, like getting out on a fire and smelling smoke and appreciating what's going on and all the processes, being able to talk with people and learn about what they're dealing with, what are the barriers, those kinds of things. There's a lot of value, obviously, in getting that experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, well, we've been kind of yapping on for a while about lots of really interesting topics. I was curious, do you have any things that you're doing that you're really excited about that you want to share with people, or maybe connect them to some resources or anything like that?
Oh man, that's a good question. um, I
Was
guess this is
intentionally wide open too.
um, see, what am I doing? It's a great question. I guess this is less about what I'm doing, but a program that I think is really cool and worth following to the extent that we can. My colleague in TNC, Mary Huffman, coordinates the Indigenous Peoples Burning Network, which is really, I think, a really cool and important effort that is trying to get Indigenous folks the resources they need, the connections they need
Mm-hmm.
to each other to you know to be able to burn their land the way that they want to,
Mm-hmm.
um, and being able to talk to her and hear her um, talk about that work has been really influential for me. And then on another, this is on a very other side of the spectrum. Um, as of this week, we're prior to the pandemic here in Raleigh, and so in this area, we have been doing little quarterly get-togethers, have a drink if you want to at a local brewery here before the pandemic, and it was a really nice way to get people from research, from the field,
Mm-hmm.
from all over out, just knowing who all's doing fire around here. And obviously, we haven't been able to do that in a long time, so we're starting that up again for the first time this week, which is A, fun, and B, a nice reminder that we're able to see each other again, get together and just
Mm-hmm.
have some nice conversations with people who are doing this and live where you live.
Yeah. I had a similar experience recently. I went to another conference for the first time in quite a while, and it was just really nice to see people and be able to sit in person and listen to some of the ongoing work that people have. That's really interesting stuff, and just being in that atmosphere, and that you forget, or at least I forgot, how important that face-to-face interaction was for collaboration and community. It's just really important.
Yeah.
So,
And I'm not glad the pandemic happened, obviously, but I'm glad that the sort of hybrid Zoom stuff has stuck. I think that's important. We did a hybrid meeting for our prescribed fire council meeting this August, and we had a couple people who got sick, COVID or otherwise. We're really grateful that they could still attend and participate in some way. And I'm glad it seems like that part has stuck, and I hope it continues to do so. But it's also just really nice to see.
Yeah, I talked about that with a few people. There's obviously not pro-pandemic, but there has been some silver lining to it. One of the things is a lot of people are really familiar with technology like we're using right now, and it's made, I think it's helped with this podcast, for instance. I've been able to have a lot of people on, like yourself, that it would have been really difficult for us to get together in person and do this. And frankly, a lot of fire managers aren't, and I'm including me in this, are not experts on technology. So it's definitely helped, have a broader base, I guess, for conversations with people from a lot of different places on a lot of different topics. And that's the silver lining, that that the pandemic kind of forced us into this training, I guess, to be able to use this kind of technology. I didn't even know what Zoom was before.
Right.
Before that was going on. I remember when I tried to teach my first class, it had a hybrid Zoom section, and I was like, I don't even know what Zoom is. I'm sitting in the classroom, trying to figure out how to get all of it. Now it kind of seems silly.
Yeah.
But at the time, it was like completely new to me.
Yeah. And there's so many, like you said, like, I've talked to Jesse Wimberly talks about this a lot. Like, landowners are more familiar with the stuff. They're using Zoom to talk to their grandkids.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a huge opportunity to get them, like, basic fire training to do. We've done, a webinar about the fire tools, weather tools that are available and stuff like that those people would not have been interested in 3 years ago. All of a sudden, it's a huge opportunity.
Yeah, and I think our training that we did, the online training, a lot of people that have contacted me and asked questions, or that I've talked to about it, that participated, they really appreciated that there was an online resource like that, because they just can't take off a week to go get the prescribed burn manager training, and they need some of that initial, not that training doesn't replace that, but it really gave them a lot of information that was really helpful, that they wouldn't have been able to get through some of the in-person resources as easily. So I think it helped people take that initial step. And another thing, I can't remember who said it now, but another thing that's happened with a lot of these prescribed fire councils, like you were talking about from North Carolina, a lot of them went online, and some of them still have an online option. A lot of people can now participate in their state prescribed fire council because they can do it remotely. I think there's some value in utilizing technology in that way. People who otherwise may not be able to participate. So really good stuff. We'll always like to kind of conclude things and give you an opportunity to tell us any take-home messages or things that you want to resonate with people. Is there anything that you can think of that?
I don't know that I have any like pithy, quick takeaways. I think in general, people working in outreach they know what they need to do. It's just, it can be hard day to day to do it and feel like you're making a difference because it's such a long-term game. But, I think we are. I'm not always the most optimistic person innately, but it is cool to think about all of the work that's happening and all of the people that I know that are doing such cool stuff, and to be encouraged that, I hope that we will get somewhere better through it all.
Yeah, I think that's, there are certainly tons of people that are doing a lot of great work, and we're working towards improving in multiple areas. So I think that's safe to say. I also liked one of the things that you were talking about earlier, that, it's important for us to learn from people what are the barriers, and trying to, design outreach programming or research or whatever to address barriers, or help directly address problems, rather than what I might do sometimes, which is, just create information and put it out that people may not even need. So, we need that feedback.
We've all been there. So.
Yeah, I try to do that, but I struggle with it just like everybody else. People ask lots of questions, and that definitely drives some of the, the content. That was one of the things that, one of the reasons that I wanted to get you on, is people ask about different outreach opportunities and what kinds of stuff are going on. We have a lot of listeners that are practitioners, and they want to know where to connect people, that kind of stuff. So,
and I guess I should say, from a practical perspective, resources wise, like, the Fire Science Exchange Networks and Extension are two, like, you got to start somewhere, start there.
Yeah, those are
like we were talking about earlier. If they can't answer your question, they will, in the most positive way, pass you off to someone who can
connect you.
Connect you. That's right. I'm
Yeah. Well, I sure appreciate you coming on the show. It's been fun talking to you, and good to see you. I'm glad that you seem to be enjoying your new role. I don't think I've talked to you since you've taken the new role.
Yeah, this was fun. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, just one final thing is, if people are interested in getting in touch with you and asking questions, or getting you to connect them to resources, where can they find you?
My email is laurel.kays@tnc.org. You can email me there, and that's probably the best way. I'm currently working on getting an actual website for the Fire Learning Network, and a couple kind of sister networks we work for, because right now we're on a sort of older legacy site that TNC maintains. But Fire Learning Network does have a page on Conservation Gateway. So new website comes.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to hold you to that. We're going to be looking for it.
Yeah. So are a lot of other people. So I don't think I can wiggle out of that one.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess people can also Google Fire Learning Network and probably find some really cool resources that you all have been working on.
Yeah, definitely. The site we're on, like I said, it's a little confusing to navigate, but there's some really cool stuff on there regardless. And hopefully we'll have it in a little easier to navigate format.
Yeah, and we will provide your contact information and maybe a link to the website in the show notes. We typically try to help people if they want to get connected, to make it easy.
Cool.
So, but fun talking to you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks everybody out there for listening. We really appreciate it, and follow us online. Reach out to us if you have questions. A lot of this content is driven by feedback from the audience. So a lot of the topics that we're trying to bring to you are coming from people asking for it. So reach out to us. Let us know. We appreciate you listening. Fire University is part of the Natural Resource University podcast network, funded by the Renewable Resources Extension Act. If you like what you heard today in this episode, please follow us on all the social media platforms at UF Deer Lab.